the flickering light of Asia, or the Assyrian nation and church. It soon became apparent that the Tabriz government was not only without knowledge as to the secret activities of the Muslims in Urmia, but it had also a hand in the agitation that led to the Mohammedan uprising against the Christians. The deposed Shah Muhammad Ali, before his succession to the throne and his subsequent dethronement and exile as the crown prince and future king of Persia, had for a bribe of 3,000 tumans given his consent to the Kurdish tribes of Kurdistan to attack his own Christian subjects of Targabur, plunder their homes, and carry away their flocks and cattle, and which of course they did. The existing crown prince now residing in Tabriz was none other than the brother of the deposed monarch, a fanatical Muslim and a hater of the Christians. The plan for the assassination of Aga Petros, which was to be followed by a wholesale massacre of the Assyrians in Urmia, having failed so disastrously to the Muslims, superior authorities now concocted the diabolical scheme and formed a more treacherous conspiracy to kill the patriarch and the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian forces, and then to mobilize larger forces in order to carry out the previous program. For the extermination of the Christians, they were clever enough to play upon the virtues of their victim. He remembered how earnestly he had pleaded with them, and how sincerely he had manifested his strong desire for peace and friendly relations with both the Persian authorities and with the Muslim subjects of Persia. Now was their opportunity to lay the new trap and commit the most dastardly crime in the entire history of Persia. Indeed, similar deeds of cowardice had already been committed by the Persian authorities of Azerbaijan, but they were committed against the lawless brigands of Persia, whom they had been unable to check or arrest, save under the pretense of becoming their hosts and decorating them with medals of gold and titles of honor. But here was a man as harmless as a dove, as brave as a lion, immeasurably more efficient than all the combined forces of Persia, to protect the integrity of the Persian soil and to save the Persian subjects forever from the freebooting expeditions of their neighboring Kurds, and one who absolutely had no designs on Persia or its government. Although he can compel submission from both its dilapidated army and from its uncivilized people if he so desired, here was a great man, a noble man, of whose virtues they were going to take advantage and whom they were going to murder in cold blood. In Salamas at this time resided a notorious brigand by the name of Simku. He was undoubtedly the most dreaded by the Persian authorities of all the Kurdish chieftains of eastern Kurdistan, and was regarded as the strongest of them all. Through the game of diplomacy, he had managed to be alternately now on the Persian side and then again on the Turkish side. At the time of the Russian occupation of the state of Azerbaijan, the notorious brigand had surprised his co-religiousness and fought on the side of the Allies as well. He was once captured by the Russian soldiers and taken to Tiflis as a prisoner, but before the collapse of Russia, he had succeeded in gaining the favor of the Russian military authorities to secure his freedom and to bring back with him a considerable supply of arms and ammunition, on the promise that he would use his available force against the Turks. After the Russians had completely withdrawn from Persia, Simku, so far as Persia was concerned, became supreme, and since the day of Shah Abbas, no monarch had exercised as great as an authority over the boundary lands of northwestern Persia, the Persian government of which he was a subject as he could always defy. In so far as the Turks were concerned, he knew he could play the game again by telling them that he was forced into the service of Russia again, against his will. Simku had one fear only, and that had always risen from the Assyrian marksmen of Targabur, even though they were inferior to his men in numbers. But now that the Assyrian warriors of the hills were also present in Persia, he had become a peaceful subject and had apparently chosen to live out and far from his old nest of lawlessness in the mountains of Bradust and Sameh. It was this man that the Persian authorities used as a tool in their hands for the assassination of Mar Shimon. And after he had committed the dastardly deed, he was told if the Turks failed to make their appearance in Persia by that time, he could escape into the interior of the country and remain there unmolested. Mar Shimon and his bodyguard of 200 horsemen arrived in Salamas. During the last week of February 1918, he was welcomed by his own people and by the Armenians as well. Even the Muslims in Salamas vied with the Christians in the bestowal of honors upon him. Shortly after his arrival, he was visited by two emissaries of the Persian authorities of Tabriz. They came to the patriarch with that polished hypocrisy which grows exclusively in the soil of Islam. They reminded him of the letter that he had written several months before to the Tabriz authorities, expressing his goodwill toward the Persian government, and requesting of the latter that he and his people be allowed to reside in Persia as their temporary guests. They officially informed that the patriarch of the deep oppression that was felt by the Persian authorities of the contents of the Beatitudes letter, and that how those authorities had been glad to serve a humanitarian cause by gladly opening the gates of their country to give the Assyrian Christians a place of refuge. But the emissaries added, inasmuch as the Persian authorities desire to see those boundary lands in perfect peace and tranquility, and as much as they would no longer countenance any local Muslim agitations and uprisings against the Christians, they thought that it would be for the interest of peace if the only source of trouble that might disturb the tranquility of the country was eliminated, and that inasmuch as the Kurdish chieftain had indicated to the Persian authorities as a strong desire to come in understanding with the Assyrians, it would absolutely ensure the desired end if his beatitude could likewise assure Simku and his followers of his friendly attitude towards the latter as well. It is a short distance between Delaman, the capital of Salamas, where Mar Shimon's brothers and sister resided, and Kona Shahar, where Simku had established his new headquarters. Before the former city attained the dignity of a capital, the latter had the honor of being both the center of business and the seat of the government, and for that very reason, the old municipality still remains the name of ancient city. Kona Shahar had a large Armenian population. The latter had been wise to the setting of the trap for the assassination of Mar Shimon. They had now a common interest with the Assyrians. They were to perish or survive with their Christian co-religiousness. They secretly apprised the patriarch of Islam's plot and pleaded with him not to meet Simku unless the latter came to Delaman to meet him. From the viewpoint of political etiquette, it was indeed the place of Simku to have called on the patriarch, but the latter, ever anxious to avoid bloodshed and maintain peace with his Muslim neighbors, and ever ready to exhibit the spirit with his characteristic humility, declared his decision to visit Simku in his own headquarters. The warnings of the Armenians, the pleadings of his own people, and the tears of his nearest relatives could not persuade him to alter his decision. He was as fearless as he was meek and lowly. The Muslim element of Delaman was of course aware of the plot, and with satanic interest they were watching the road over which either Simku was to steal the doom of the conspiracy by coming to the commander-in-chief of the Assyrian forces, or the Christian patriarch, prompted by the high qualities of his Christian profession, was to be led like a lamb to the slaughter. And the Tabriz authorities lost sight for a moment of the gigantic struggle that was going on between the mighty armies of Europe, the result of which might mean to them either the supremacy or the downfall of Islam in Asia, and intently fastened their eyes upon the scene where the awful tragedy of their own creation and planning was to be enacted. On the 3rd day of March 1918, the patriarch sat in his carriage and with a bodyguard of 150 horsemen started for the headquarters of the Kurdish chieftain. He went to assure the notorious brigand that he could remain absolutely certain of the peaceful attitude of the Assyrians, provided his own men indulged no longer in the deeds of violence and lawlessness. But was not this noble and Christian attitude of a great patriarch equivalent to the giving of bread to the dogs and the casting of pearls before the swine? The news of Mar Shimon's departure preceded him, and before his arrival the great assassin, who could hardly believe the report, stationed 700 of his best marksmen in concealed and commanding positions, with the order to shoot simultaneously at the sight of the patriarch when he emerged from the house of their chieftain after the visit. No servant could have received his master with a greater honor. The patriarch was escorted into the house. 2 of his bodyguard accompanied him within. The others remained outside. The apparent absence of the Kurds from the environs of their chieftain's residence took the Assyrians off their guard. In the course of the friendly interview between the patriarch and the Kurdish chief, one of the men who had accompanied Mar Shimon into the house noticed from the window the presence of the concealed Kurds on the surrounding roofs. Realizing the full import of the situation, the attendant said to the patriarch in Assyrian, "My lord, our end is certain. Permit me to kill this dog, just to avenge the blood that will surely be shed." The patriarch, with an incredulous smile, bade his attendant be calm. "My lord," repeated the Assyrian guard, "they will surely kill us all. Let me kill this dog. Perhaps we can save your life." The patriarch restrained his attendant again. He arose to depart, accompanied by Simku to the door. The latter shook the hand of his guests and went back into the house, and just as Mar Shimon was seated in his carriage, surrounded by his bodyguard, the 700 Kurds fired all simultaneously into the group of their unsuspecting victims. Only 6 of these men escaped, with wounds in their bodies, to give the news of the tragedy and tell the story of the patriarch's assassination.